to say. So today is the day that you get the report on how to keep Australia's electricity stable, secure and hopefully cheaper. What has this report told you?
Well, we haven't got the report as of yet. We're hoping to get it later today, but it comes following a request from the Turnbull government to the Australian Energy Market Operator for advice about the level of dispatchable energy we need in the system. You see, we've seen over the last 10 years more than 5,000 megawatts come out of the system as coal-fired power stations have closed. And not all electrons are created equal. Coal-fired power, gas-fired power, hydropower is spinning turbines that can be provided 24/7, whereas wind and solar power can only be provided when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining or if there's backup storage. So we need to ensure that we have a level of dispatchable power in the system which will provide more stability to the grid. And that's the advice we're seeking today.
Why did you need this report? Because the Finkel report was pretty clear on how they think that you should bring down electricity prices. They say the best way is to put a clean energy target in place. So why did you need to go and do this report on top of that?
Well, it's more than just prices. It's actually about the stability of the system. And we've seen the closure of Hazelwood, which was more than 20% of Victoria's energy supply, and that has had an impact both on price but also stability. As we go into summer, we're going to have a tight supply-demand balance, and I know the Australian Energy Market Operator is doing everything possible to ensure continuous supply through this summer. With Liddell, one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in New South Wales, scheduled to close in 2022, we need to know that there is going to be sufficient dispatchability in the network, and that is what this report will show.
I was going to ask you about Liddell because there's some speculation the government could put in place incentives to allow Liddell to stay open for longer. The operators have suggested they don't want to do that. Could the government find some way to actually take over that existing, Liddell and in the interests of security and supply, carry on with it even if the current operators don't want to?
Well, the Prime Minister's made it clear in his comments, so has the Treasurer, myself and others, that the cheapest form of existing power generation comes from existing coal. It's also a stable, reliable form of dispatchable power. So if we can keep our coal-fired power stations going for longer, then that can provide a good outcome for Australian consumers. I mean, Dr. Finkel was conscious of that as well. He still had more than 50% of the energy mix coming from coal-fired power by 2030, which is one of the highest in any country in the developed world. We recognise that we need coal in our system, and we will ensure that that continues to be the case.
So how would you do that then in relation to Liddell? I mean, if you could make sure that Liddell continues to be open in some way, that would be good for jobs around Newcastle as well. But what are the mechanisms that you'd do? How would you do it?
I'm not going to speculate on what would happen post-2022. We know that AGL, as the owner of Liddell, has set that as the public closure date. That is still some time away, and the purpose of today's report that we will receive from AEMO is actually to detail what will be needed to stabilise the energy grid in place of Liddell when that closure goes
But just so I'm clear, you are open to the idea of putting in place some mechanisms for it to stay open beyond 2022?
Look, we're not talking specifically about Liddell. What we're saying to the Australian Energy Market Operator is with the scheduled closure of Liddell, we need to ensure that there is sufficient dispatchable power in the system, and could they provide advice to us as to what that specific need and the number of megawatt capacity will be required.
So if, for example, Liddell closes, they don't want to go beyond 2022, but this report says to you that this is a big problem, what do you do?
Well, this is where the advice of the Australian Energy Market Operator is absolutely critical, because with 5 years to that closure date, a lot of preparation and planning and construction and generation can actually take place. A number of important recommendations in the Finkel report have actually already been accepted by the Commonwealth and by the states, which will also help ensure a more reliable system going forward. For example, large-scale generators will have to give a minimum 3 years notice before they can close, which will mean we won't see a repeat of either the closure of Hazelwood or Northern Power Station in South Australia. What we'll also see now is intermittent sources of power, wind and solar, provide their own backup, which will be very important. And that could be a gas-fired power, that could come from lithium-ion batteries, or that could come from pumped hydro.
If the government supports a clean energy target, how will that lower energy prices? Because there's a lot of your colleagues on the backbench that are pretty sceptical about that.
Well, I said at the time of Dr Finkel's report, and I have to emphasise it's a report to government, not a report by government. But what the thinking was behind his report was if you incentivise more generation into to the grid, then more supply means lower prices. And that is what he is trying to do with his clean energy target, is provide a mechanism which provides a level of investment certainty so that those companies that make 30 to 40 year bets by building a coal-fired power station, gas-fired power station, or indeed a wind or a solar farm, actually have a level of certainty to make that investment confident that they'll know what their return is.
But in terms of, the coal issue, the problem you've got, isn't it, that, there's been speculation that you could use the NAIF, the Northern Australia Fund, to fund something up in Northern Australia, but Liddell is kind of ready to go. Wouldn't it make more sense to find a way to keep Liddell open?
Well, look, Liddell is 5 years hence. It's a 2022 scheduled closure, and then there's a scheduled closure years after that in Vales Point, also in New South Wales. And clearly we don't want to see another repeat of the closure of Hazelwood, where we only had a matter of months before that power station closed. I think the key point to understand is that the coalition places a critical importance on the role of coal, thermal generation, baseload generation, dispatchable generation, whatever you want to call it. We see it as absolutely critical to the stability of the system. Now, the Labor Party have supported motions in the Senate calling for the accelerated closure of coal-fired power stations. That's not going to be good for price, and that's not going to be good for stability. And with their recklessly high renewable energy targets and their support of their Labor colleagues in Victoria, who have put a 300% increase in the royalties on coal-fired generation in Latrobe Valley, the Labor Party is a recipe for higher prices and a less stable system, whereas we see a key role for coal going forward.
Okay, just finally, you were all over Mark Butler last week when he confessed that everybody knew that this spike in gas exports was going to lead to there'd be an impact on prices here in Australia. Are you saying that a Liberal government would have put a gas reserve in at that time?
Well, the question is not about a gas reserve. The question is, well, why did they not actually take action when they were warned by both the Australian Energy Market Operator in 2012 and in their own energy white paper to ensure that there was sufficient supply of gas? You see, they green-lighted...
So what have you done?
Well, the question is, if we had that advice at the time, we would have taken action that is needed to ensure the sufficient supply domestically. They green-lighted a situation where now we're exporting 2/3 of what we produce on the East Coast, and we know that for every $1 a gigajoule the price of gas increases, it's $10 a megawatt hour in terms of the increase in electricity.
You've been Minister for a while,
prices.
though. I mean, do you think you should have acted earlier on this?
Well, the Prime Minister's put in place very strong restrictions on the exportation of gas, but the green light for those projects, which is part of the reason we're having the high gas prices today, came from the Labor government, the Rudd, the Gillard Labor government. Now, they were warned. It was in their own energy white paper. Mark Butler denied those warnings when he went on Insiders earlier this year. He's now confessed to have been warned. Why didn't he take action? That's the question. Whatever the action may have been necessary, he should have taken it. But why didn't he take it, and why did he seek to deny it after the event?
Okay, Josh Frydenberg, thanks a lot for your time.
Good to be with you.